Hey everyone, welcome to our first Verizon Connect introductory training session. What we'll be doing today is covering some basic terminology and then showing you how you can configure your UI to bring in all of those important elements that we'll be covering with the terms. But just to begin with, on a high-level overview, what we'll want to do is talk to you first about why we're choosing Verizon Connect. And through this explanation, hopefully you can see as we progress throughout these training sessions, some of the really great features that are within Verizon and that will ultimately help you as a supervisor, as a team lead, or as a coordinator have a better picture of how the operations are running within your specific territory. So that's going to be our long-term goal throughout these training series, is to really see the advantages of Verizon and to learn those unique tools that are offered in this platform. But just for today, in the immediate goal for today's first lesson is to get you an understanding of some of the basic terms and to help you navigate throughout the UI. And just to build on some of the great features that are within Verizon and that you can see as we progress throughout these lessons. One of the big things that Verizon offers us is the ability to optimize our routes. And you'll be seeing this a lot more when we get into training sessions centered around on-call dispatching and pre-planning with scenarios. But essentially, because Verizon's software builds routes based on time windows and sequences the pickups according to those windows. It's a great system that helps us prevent early and late arrivals. This is a big metric for us as a company, and it really helps us reduce things such as missed pickups or non-productive stops when we adhere to the outlined pickup windows within a given account. So that's the immediate thing that Verizon offers us that isn't necessarily offered in our old logistics management system. The next thing that Verizon offers is visibility. And in particular, this is the first system that we'll have where we can see on a map view how all of our routes are operating within a given day. You can see where the couriers are, where they're progressing throughout their route. And most importantly, if you're somebody like a supervisor or team lead, you can see how your routes are running and if they're optimally functioning. For example, you can see certain things like overlapping routes or crisscrossing routes, which you might want to cut down on in terms of improving the efficiency of how your routes are being run. In addition, for unique accounts that are on calls, you can see the physical distance from where that on call is relative to how your routes are currently being run. So it's a great way to recognize whether or not, hey, I can assign this to a particular set of couriers, or whether or not I might have to utilize an OSC service in order to get this particular on call. And lastly, another great feature of Verizon that really attracted us to using the platform is the ability to plan. And this comes into hand when we're doing certain scenarios such as OSC conversion. So as you can see in this slide right here, what we see on the left is an example of how current routes are running within the DC or the DMV region. And symbolized by the house symbols here, you can see these are OSC stops. And based on some of the Verizon routing scenarios we were able to run, we could see which stops could be serviced by existing routes that are already in-house, already bio routes, versus how many stops we would could be serviced if we were to bring in an additional driver. So these are great planning tools that can help us as a company see which stops we can take back from OSCs. And that's a unique feature of Verizon that we currently don't have in our current system. Well, if we were trying to run things in our current system, you may be familiar with plugging in stops one at a time within Google Maps. But you can prevent all of that with Verizon. You can throw them all in at the same time within Verizon, and you can, on top of that, lay them on top of how your routes are currently being run. So it really gives you more flexibility in terms of taking back OSC stops. So now with those big things outlined and with those benefits of Verizon shown, what we want to get into now is a little bit more of the granular details. And in specific, we want to talk about, well, how does Verizon accomplish some of these things? And in order to really understand that, it's important to talk about how routes are built within Verizon. And as we start talking about how routes are built in Verizon, we'll start touching on some of those key terms that are unique within Verizon, and we're going to try to overlap them and relay them back to what you may be familiar with from Sierra. So off the bat, what we'll talk about first is the driver component of a route. Within Verizon, routes are consistent of three big elements. The first being the driver, the second being recurring jobs, which is another term unique to Verizon, and the third being on-calls. And starting off with the first part of a driver, what's unique about Verizon is that within this system, we can have the shift of a driver, which is the working hours that they're working, in addition to the shift pattern. So you can see not only the hours that they're scheduled to work, but also the days of the week they are expected to work. And that's really important in terms of how the software then decides to give and distribute pickups, because it will look at all of the working couriers for a particular day in a particular territory. So that's a unique feature of Verizon, is the component of a shift. Another unique thing within Verizon is the idea of having a base and end marker. So within Verizon, the couriers can have a base marker, which is essentially just their starting location that is unique to them. So this comes in real handy with drivers who are perhaps remote drivers and that don't check into the local hub. So as a result, all of the routes that Verizon builds assumes their base location. You can specify where that is. You can say, hey, this driver is starting from the local hub versus driver two is starting from their home because it's a remote driver. And just with that information alone, it really refines how the routes are being built and how on-calls are being distributed. And then the last big part how of what constitute a driver is this term called a tag. And we'll touch more on this deeper, but essentially a tag is a way that Verizon is connecting a stop to a driver. It lets the software know that this particular pickup needs to be performed by this particular driver. And one way you can think about this is a tag is essentially the route number for a driver. And that pretty much covers up the driver component. Next up is recurring jobs. And that's another term that we'll touch on and we'll look at more in the UI. But essentially, a recurring job is a routine pickup and that has specified time windows. So these are pickups that are scheduled. They could be Monday through Friday or something more specific like Wednesday through Friday. And what's really important about the recurring jobs is that they all have time windows. They have a start and they have an end time. And that's really what makes Verizon stand out even more, is that every pickup within Verizon requires the entry of a start and an end time. And that's because every route is built based on those pickup times. Because the primary goal of the routing is to build and sequence stops in an order where early and late arrivals are mitigated as much as possible. So those are recurring jobs. They're routine pickups that are scheduled and that fall on a driver. And they're connected with a driver through the tags again. So a driver themselves will have a tag and the recurring job will have a tag. So if I'm a driver who covers a route, say NCA 101, my personal profile would have a tag that says NCA 01, and the jobs that are supposed to go to me will have that same tag. So that lets the software know to give me that pickup. And lastly, the third component that builds a route in Verizon are what you may call an on-call. These are day of additional jobs. So they are by nature not recurring jobs. Instead, these are jobs that are added daily through dispatch environment. And we'll show you guys more how to do that as we go along. But on-calls are separate from recurring jobs because of their ad hoc nature, their day of nature. And in terms of how we can assign on-calls in Verizon, there's a lot of features we can use. As we get into the UI, you will see the map feature that is really unique to Verizon, and that will help you assign on-calls when you're unsure of who to give it to. And the next thing we want to cover now is, now that we kind of had a brief overview of how routes are structured in Verizon, how is all of this data pulled together and essentially produced in dispatch? And it's in this simple process that you're seeing here on the screen. Essentially, what Verizon does is, on a daily basis, a supervisor or team lead will be creating something called a scenario. And what a scenario does is it pulls all of the background data within the Verizon UI. So we talked about data such as driver shifts, vehicles, their start and end location, as well as recurring jobs, so a routine pickup schedule, and any physical locations, which is markers, which we'll touch on in just a little bit. But essentially, a scenario is a tool that is unique to Verizon. It's the planning tool for Verizon that allows the system to connect all of the background data, such as drivers or accounts and pickup schedules. And with all of those pieces of information combined, it creates routes through this process. And once the scenario is published, it produces the routes in a live dispatch environment. So this is where a lot of the couriers, the dispatchers, team leads, supervisors will be living out of, is operating out of dispatch. But it's important for us to learn as we go through this series how data is being brought into dispatch. And it's really going to help us understand some of the great features in Verizon. So that was just a brief overview of some of the terms. We'll get into it more now as we look into the UI and touch back on some of the ideas with our existing system in Sierra. So let's hop into the UI where we can first start talking about this concept called a marker. So I'm in my Verizon UI right now. I'm just set within my home page. And the first topic that we want to talk about is this idea called a marker. And as you can see here, I've got my left side panel, which has all the options and navigation tools within Verizon. And towards the end of this session, we're going to show you how to configure your UI so that you can access the items most relevant to your needs. So the first thing we want to do is head into something called markers. So that's located underneath the main tab here to the left. And when I click into markers, you can see a drop-down list of accounts and their account names. So if I expand out here, this name here, you'll see the account number that we're familiar with, as well as the account name. And if you look to the columns to the right here, you'll see the basic information associated with a marker. And this tells us what a marker really is in Verizon. And all it is the geographical data of an account. There's no pickup schedules, there's no pickup windows associated with the marker. All the marker is just the account location information. So, for example, when I click into AF383, you're seeing that we have the account number followed by the account name, and listed below are the street address associated with this account. And that's all the marker is. It just gives us the location of the account, both in the street address as well as the latitude and the longitude. And we'll touch more in another training session about how we can do things such as creating a marker, such as editing a marker. and stuff like that. But for now, you can think about a marker as the physical location of an account. There is no pickup windows or scheduled pickups associated with it. It's simply just a database with all of the accounts and their geographical location. And that is located again in the markers table underneath the main tab. Now, the next concept that we'll want to talk about is a recurring job. Now, a recurring job is what has the pickup windows as well as the days of the week for the pickup. So if I exit out of the markers, I'll head back into the left side panel here, and I want to look for recurring jobs, which is located underneath my jobs and routes dropdown. So I'll go ahead and click into recurring jobs, and that's going to bring up my recurring jobs table UI. And within this UI, I can filter my recurring jobs based on the territory I'm interested in. So if I click on this dropdown, you can see all the territories that bioreference services. And for an example, I have Northern California selected, so I can see all of the recurring jobs in Northern California. Now, just to recap, a recurring job is a routine pickup. So there will never be an on-call listed in here. It's just going to be routine pickups. And if I click into one for an example, you can see this one, A1365, is a routine pickup on a Friday that occurs between 1 o'clock and that can still be serviced before 11 o'clock. So what we see here, if I go to the right side of the menu, once I have my recurring job selected, is just some more detailed information. Essentially, the recurring job requires the marker because the marker gave us the location of the account. So that is what this recurring job is built off of. And if I scroll down in the overview menu here, you can see basic information such as when the pickups are allowed on what days and what times the pickup is allowed. And we'll touch more on recurring jobs in the future, but that's essentially the basics of a recurring job. It's when the account is being serviced, as well as the days of the week it is being serviced. Now, while we're on the recurring jobs page, you might be asking, how does this tie in with the route? And we talked a little bit about it earlier with this idea called a tag. And so you'll see if I head into this detail view here and I scroll down, not only will you see the basic account info, but you'll see this column called driver requires. And within this driver requires column is the tag. And so this is a tag NCA02, which lets the software know that this routine pickup should go to the courier who also has this tag, NCA02. So essentially, the tags distinguish and identify the routes for us. Each driver will have a tag that is representative of their route, and each recurring job will have a tag as well, which connects that pickup to the driver. So that was their third big term, is this idea called a tag. It's something that is connected to the driver and that is connected to the recurring job. And it essentially pulls those two pieces of information together to create the pickup schedule for a specific driver or route. So those are three big topics, basic terminology topics. Again, the marker was just the physical location of the account. The recurring job is the pickup schedule for the account. And the tag is what connects the pickup to the driver. Now, the last big topic that we'll touch on today is this idea called a scenario. And it's something that's completely unique to Verizon, and that is really important for us in terms of planning. So if I go ahead and close out of recurring jobs and I head back down into my main panel here, I can see scenarios located underneath jobs and routes. And if I click into scenarios, it may look a little bare right now, but this is essentially where on a daily process, supervisors and team leads will be creating this thing called a scenario. And all this does is it connects the recurring jobs with the drivers who are scheduled to work for the day. And we'll touch more on this in a deeper training session, but right now, what's really important for you to understand is that a scenario is a planning tool that can help you identify which routes are working, which stops are being serviced, and it could also help you with more complex things such as identifying areas where you could perhaps consolidate two routes into one, or perhaps areas where you could take back OSC stops and give them to a bio driver. So again, that's going to be another training session down the line, but for now, scenarios is an important thing to understand. It's just for you to know it's a planning tool and it's a sandbox environment. It allows you to create routes, assign jobs in a safe environment, and then once you decide to do so, if you're happy with your scenario, you can push that data and publish it into dispatch. And we'll see dispatch in just a little bit when we talk about configuring our UI. But those were the four big topics and terms that are going to help you lay the foundation for understanding more about Verizon. And just to recap, their markers, their recurring jobs, tags, and scenarios. So we'll get to the third part of the training today, which is going to be showing you how to configure your UI. And in order for us to do that, what I'll do first is I'll go ahead and exit out of my profile because you can see I have my profile set to a certain way. But I'll log into a fresh one right now and show you some of the columns and some of the features that we really would recommend you guys having. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to locate my sub-users, and I'm going to log into Anita's profile for the day and show you how to set up your UI. So I'm going to log into Anita right now. So if you are first time logging into Verizon, you may see something like this. You'll see her configuration looks a little different than mine, but if I exit out of this dispatch, I have the same homepage, and the navigation is still the same in terms of the left side panel here. So one of the first things that we can do and that we recommend you all doing is you can choose to favorite certain tables in here. So one of the things that you as a dispatcher, team leader, supervisor would be encountering a lot is heading into dispatch. So if I hover over this dispatch option, I can see the ability to add this to my favorites. So I'm simply going to star that. And when I do so, you'll see it pops up here in my favorites section. So it just helps me access this feature whenever I'm in the UI. Similarly, I can do that with markers and recurring jobs, because these are two things that you may be hopping in back and forth in terms of editing or making adjustments. So those are three essential elements that you can just favorite. And let's hop into dispatch and show you what settings you need to have set up in order to see things properly. So I'll go ahead and I'll click into dispatch. And when I head into dispatch, you can see this is how the Verizon dispatch board will look like every day. And currently, I am set to today's date, which is great, which is what we want to be looking for. But if you were ever to, say, want to review pickups in the past, you can change your date by clicking on this drop down to select dates in the future or in the past. As also, what you can do is if you're responsible for working throughout multiple territories, in this drop down here, you can click down and see all of the various territories that we have coverage in. And we're going to stay in Northern California for this example, but let's look and break down this dispatch view first. What you'll see here in the top left corner is what we'll call the jobs panel. And so in this jobs panel, you'll be seeing all of the pickups scheduled for that day. Now, the job panel consists of the recurring jobs, so the routine pickups that are falling on a courier's route, as well as any on-calls. On-calls that are created will populate in this jobs panel as well, and we'll show you how to configure this jobs panel in just a little bit. But to my right here is the map panel. So this is a great feature where you can start seeing things such as how your routes look like, how much overlap there may be between your routes, or where an on-call pickup occurs and how that relates to where your current routes are. So right now, my map is zoomed out to just California, but if I wanted to zoom into the specific routes within that, I would need to head down here into my route panel. So that constitutes the third part of our dispatch board. At the very bottom, you'll be seeing a route panel such as this, and it has essentially all of the routes that are operating for that day here. And if we wanted to see the routes on the map themselves, what I can do is click on this eyeball here, and it will allow me the option to show all of the routes on the map. And sure enough, when I click on it, I can start seeing the map and all the routes. And we're going to show you kind of how we want to configure this UI just to make it look a little bit cleaner and just to give you the most pertinent information you would need if you're working out of dispatch. So the very first thing that we would recommend everybody doing is setting the scale of the UI based on what's comfortable with their vision. And we can do that by locating our name at the very top. So again, I'm working in Anita's profile here, but if I click on the drop down to the top right here, you can see the option to scale this UI to be small, medium, or large. And it's just up to your personal preference. If you choose a large feature, you can get a zoomed in view that looks somewhat like this. Or if you're comfortable and you're maybe working out of a bigger screen, you can choose a smaller scale just to get more information within your screen. Now, when you're initially logging in, you would see these notifications that could link you to other training sources. But if you want to ignore this for the future, you can simply just click do not show this message again and close out of that. So you can see right here, this is how the scale setting looks like if I had selected small. But let's say, hey, I'm not too thrilled on this setting. Let me go back into medium. And we'll stick with that for the rest of this training session. You can do so just simply by clicking up in the scale. So that's the first thing you can do. You can set your scale by locating it up in here, up below your name. And the next thing we really recommend you to do is to locate this cog here to the top right of the map panel. And if you hover over it, you'll see it's labeled as dispatch preferences. And when you click into that, the first thing you'll want to do is change your day start time. By default, they are set to 12 a.m., but what you'll want to do is change that to something like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. And the reason for that is many territories will have overnight line haul drivers that are working. So if you were to say, look at this view for Tuesday, and you had this day start time set at 12 a.m., you would still see all of the pickups that occur from your Monday line haul driver who, say, starts at 10 p.m. and ends their shift at 5 a.m. Tuesday morning. So if we change this to, say, 7 a.m. and save it, then that will prevent us from seeing those line haul drivers who were working the night prior. And that just helps keep the dispatch board cleaner and keeps the focus on today's pickups. So again, that's just located up at the top in dispatch preferences. Make sure you are changing that day start time to something like 6 or 7 a.m. The next thing you'll want to do within dispatch preferences is you'll want to make sure that you have maximum route recommendations set to 5. And this is something we'll build on later as we go into our dispatching guide. But essentially, when we use a feature called recommended routes, having this set to 5 will have the software give us a minimum of 5 recommendations for routes So we have that set here, and we can go ahead and save that. And that's the two big features we wanted to cover. We wanted to show you how you could scale your UI, as well as how you can set your start time and your route recommendation options. Now, next up, we'll go into some of the unique panels in Dispatch and show you what columns you want to be bringing in to Dispatch to get the most important pieces of information. So let's go ahead and just focus on the jobs panel first. And again, you can scale your UI. You can adjust how the panels are based on these sliders here. You hover over them and you can slide them up and down to your desire. So in this example, we'll just have the jobs panel as is. And we're going to look to bring in some other columns as well. By default, you'll see a job name column, which is just the name of the pickup, as well as something called a code. Now, these codes would generally be empty, so you can go ahead and click into that column, head down in the columns, and deselect code, because for our purposes, they won't help out too much. So I'll have that deselected, and I can click out of it, and sure enough, that column disappeared. Now, we do want to keep our driver column as well, because that is helpful for identifying who's doing a pickup. And we can resize the column just by sliding over right there. Now, we want to bring in some other columns as well. And to do so, we'll head back into any column. We can hover over it to reveal the dropdown. And then heading into columns, the next thing that we want you guys to add is the days. Now, when I click into days, you can see the pickup schedule for the recurring jobs. So since we are in Tuesdays, the majority of these pickups are occurring on a Tuesday, and that's matches up with what we would expect. So I'll slide that over, and I have my days brought in. Now the next field I want to bring in is the driver requirements. Now again, this is showing the tags, which is connecting the pickup, the recurring job, with the driver down here. So you can think about the driver required tags as essentially the route number. So you want to bring that field in. It's very insightful. It lets you know, okay, this pickup is occurring on route NCA 12 for the day. So again, that's driver requirements. And we'll head back into columns because there's a couple other things we want to be adding as well. You can add in the job type. It will tell you if it's a routine pickup or an on-call, if it's a live or if it's a box. So that's going to be in job type. And then the next thing we can do as well is look at the planned arrival time. So this is when Verizon is routing the driver and it's expecting the driver to arrive to that pickup destination. So when I added it in there, you can see for this account, A1365, the software is expecting the driver to arrive around 6:15. And this is well within the pickup windows. So that's great. That's exactly what we would expect. And speaking of pickup windows, we might want to have that kind of information in there as well. So we can go ahead and add that in here, and that's going to be time windows. Time window 1 being when the driver should be arriving, the earliest they can arrive, 2 being the latest for the arrival. So I can click into there, and you'll see those are added in as well. So now we're getting a lot more detailed information in our jobs panel, which is great. And we'll just want to double check one more time to see what other columns we can have. If we're interested, we can bring in the address for the pickup location as well. And then if we scroll down, there's another important column that we really recommend, and that's something called a status. And when we click into that and hover over to it, you can see that it tells you whether or not the job has been completed or whether it's currently being assigned. So that means the courier has yet to arrive. And also it will tell you if a courier is en route to a destination. So this could be really important because as a dispatcher, it will let you know, okay, this courier is currently en route to pick up at this account. And you could probably respond to some customer emails at that point and let them know they're arriving, or perhaps it's a customer calling in asking for an ETA. So again, that's in the status column here. And let's say we want to move some of these columns around. We can simply click on the column, drag it over, and let go, and it will help us align the columns that we would need. So those are the really big columns we recommend you bringing in. Status being one of the more important ones, time windows being very critical for making sure everybody's hitting their windows, and then driver required tags, just so you can see the route and the pickups that these jobs need to go on. So that's the jobs panel. Let's go ahead and look at how we can edit up this map panel a little bit more to make the routes look cleaner. So earlier we showed you how you can show all of the routes on the map by clicking on this eyeball at the very top. And when I do so, you can see that the lines within here don't look that clean. It doesn't look like an actual route. And that's true because we don't have snap to road selected. So if I click into there, you can see now this is the actual pathway that the couriers will be taking when they're going out on their route. Another thing that we can be doing as well is we can change how the zones look like on our map. We can then also change out any jobs as well, or we can change the contrast. So here's the low contrast mode, here's the topographical view, and here's the standard view that we have here. And then the next thing that you want to do, let's say, hey, this is great. I see all of these routes, but they all look like one route because of the color. What you can then do is right above the map feature here, there's the option that to color by violation. And if we click down into that, we can choose to color by the route. And when I do so, you can see now each route is separated with a distinct color. And it helps me identify, okay, this color right here is one driver, this is another, and here's another. Another useful feature is just recommending you guys selecting color by route and snap to road so you can see the actual pathway of the courier. Now, again, if I ever wanted to expand this view, I can simply slide this out here, slide it down, or I can choose these viewing options at the very top here. So as you can see here, we've got it naturally selected to view all panels. But if I head over here, I can choose to ignore the map panel completely, or I can just choose to focus on the routes, or I can just choose to focus on the pickups. And lastly, if we wanted to, we can just focus on the map view itself by clicking on the last option, View Map, and then it allows us to zoom in and play around and identify things a lot more. So again, just options to see how you want to view your panels, but we do recommend having all three up at once, but you can choose to alter it based on your needs. So that's pretty much the settings that you would want to have in the map panel. And the last setting that you want to be looking at is within this route panel at the very bottom. So you can see here, we've got some default column names. We've got route name, duration, driver, vehicle, as well as their start time. And the other column that we would recommend you bringing in, you can again click down into the drop down and select the columns, is the status of that driver, because this lets you know whether or not the courier has started their route or if they have not yet started yet. And this makes sense to us. These are some of our later working drivers, so they haven't started yet and everything's looking okay. Likewise, what I can do here is choose to bring in or hide certain columns. If you're seeing this right here, this is the Gantt chart, which gives you a view of when stops fall on a route. But right now it looks a little bit bunched up. So if we wanted to, we can go ahead and get rid of that. And if we wanted to just focus on one particular driver at a time and see that Gantt chart, we can select that individual driver. We can right click and we can choose to open a detailed view. And this will just bring up the same Gantt chart that we had just hidden, but it will be specific to each driver we have selected. So right now I'm selected on Carlos, and you can see that he's scheduled to go to the airport transfer at this time and in this sequence. If I was to hop around, I can go to Courier Benny, and I would see how his route looks like for the day as well. So those are the basic columns that you want to be bringing into the jobs panel, the map panel, and the route panel at the very bottom. It will give you all of the pertinent information you're looking for, such as arrival times, such as the routes, and the status of that pickup. And last, just to recap it again, make sure you are changing your day start time to something like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. Rather than the default midnight. So it'll prevent you from seeing old routes that had occurred the day prior, such as those overnight line hauls. So that's the basic UI configuration that you would want in Dispatch. And what we covered today was hopefully to give you an idea of the basic terms in Verizon. And as we go through these training sessions, we'll build more on those terms. We'll get more in depth with it, and you'll play around in the Dispatch UI even more to see how you can do things such as adding an on-call, such as consolidating two routes into one, or replacing a driver for the day who called in sick with a backup driver. So that concludes our first training session. Thank you all for attending, and we'll have the notes in the description.